So we've been using PARAS in our service, mainly one-to-one with patients with stroke. We have done it a couple of times where we've had two patients together who've been at a similar stage, but mainly we have been using it one-to-one with both physiotherapy and occupational therapy and with our rehab assistants. Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of different neurological conditions, and a lot of them have had communication problems. So we have had to tailor it a little bit, obviously. What we have found is where you can sort of use parts of PARAS, so you don't have to use the complete booklet. We have found that really helpful for people with cognitive difficulties, just so as it's not quite so overwhelming and we can just focus on a particular part. And then with the communication, we found that the pictures have been really helpful. So to try and explore what they want to engage more in. We have linked with our speech and language therapy colleagues, and they use something called talking mats. So sometimes around more the barrier identification, goal setting, we have used some of the more sort of speech and language therapy techniques to help guide us with that. So it is a bit more tricky, but you can definitely still use the principles. Yeah, so I was just working with two people who had a stroke. They were both at a similar stage, so they were doing a little bit, but not very much. And it was more around, they weren't sure how to start. And I just happened to be seeing them at the same time, and I'd just done my sort of PARAS training, and so I just sort of brought them in together, and we did it more as a sort of a conversation. I think that's, for me, one of the things that I've found PARAS to be most useful for, is starting that conversation about physical activity, and it's provided a really helpful framework to then have the conversation. And it worked well doing it with the two people. I think if they'd been at very different stages, possibly not quite so well, but it worked well for the two of them. I've used it with quite a few patients, mainly with stroke, although I have used it with a couple of people with MS around activity levels. This one particular gentleman, he described himself as quite active. But then when we were going into the time, sort of the weekly schedule, and actually how much time do you spend sitting, he was spending a lot of the day sitting. I mean, over 3/4 of the day sitting down, but he described himself as active. And so, through those conversations, I think he realised that he wasn't as active as he thought. And so for him, it was a bit like, it was quite an eye-opening moment. And I had not taken his word for it. He'd said, "Oh, I'm quite active," and I'd sort of gone along with that. But when we actually broke it down a bit more, that was the part for him that was particularly useful, because he had ideas about what he wanted to do. He just didn't realise how inactive he was being. I think one of the things that we've also found really useful is being able for the PARAS sort of documentation to be quite flexible. So for some people, we've used the booklet and we've done it sort of as a complete. And for other people, we've used the resources where you can then just pick and choose sort of elements of PARAS that you want to use. And that means that you can really tailor it to an individual person, rather than having to deliver exactly the same thing to exactly the same patient. And we found that has engaged people better, because you can just make it a bit more individual.